please welcome our honored guests, members of the House of Representatives, members of the United States Senate, the former and current Secretary of Defense, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to the United States Capitol. In a few weeks, Americans will mark 70 years since the end of World War II. When that war concluded on the deck of the battleship Missouri, General MacArthur spoke of his great hope that the carnage of that war would be a foundation for the future based, in his words, on the dignity of man and the fulfillment of his most cherished wish for freedom, tolerance, and justice. While we know that the world failed to emerge, especially in Asia, and within a few years, America was called to lead the free world against communist tyranny. President Kennedy would later call this the long twilight struggle. This struggle led us first to Korea in the early 50s. Later, led us to Vietnam, a country that few Americans had ever heard of. And today we gather to celebrate the Vietnam Commemoration and the 50 years since the deployment of America's first ground combat units. We do this consistent with the will of the United States Congress and with the President's proclamation. And we also do this with obvious pride and appreciation. At this time, I'd like to ask two groups of heroes to stand up. And if you'll hold your applause until both groups have risen. First, as Speaker, I'm blessed to ask my congressional colleagues who served during Vietnam to please rise. And I'd like to ask all Vietnam-era veterans with us here today, please rise and let's give them a big hand. Today we honor all veterans of the Vietnam War, including those held as prisoners or still listed as missing. We honor their sacrifice and their service on behalf of a grateful nation, and we pay special attention to give thanks to the families of these heroes. Vietnam was a tough war. It was a long war, but the soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen who served built a reputation for commitment and courage unparalleled in our military history. They faced rejection on the home front, something that should never, ever happen, and they stood tall and did their duty without complaint. And so today is a very special day, because Americans still want the things that MacArthur spoke about on the Missouri: dignity, freedom, tolerance, and justice. These are things worth fighting for anywhere in the world. And I give special thanks to God that we're defended today by warriors inspired by the example of these Vietnam veterans.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the presentation of the colors, the singing of our national anthem, and the retiring of the colors. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as the chaplain of the House of Representatives, Reverend Patrick Conroy, gives the invocation.
Let us pray. God of heaven and earth, we thank you that we are able to gather here in the nation's capital to remember a pivotal reality of a generation of Americans, the Vietnam War, begun a half-century ago. We thank you for those thousands who served their nation in a land far, far away. They lost many of their companions on the field of battle. Grant to them, those left behind, your peace. And for those who mourned their loved ones still, grant not only whatever healing is needed, but also increasing hope toward a more peaceful future. May these veterans' faithfulness and commitment to the greatness of our nation, reflected in the service of our nation in Vietnam, always remind us of who we are called to. Americans engaged in the service of our nation, indeed to our world, and compatriots through history, experience, and choice. And may all that we do with the lives you have given us be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Jeff Miller, Representative from Florida.
America as a nation has grown much since the Vietnam War, and it is my sincere hope that we will never, ever again abandon a generation of veterans like we did to the Vietnam generation. Thankfully, we seem to have learned that lesson. Long before our culture accepted the idea that you can support our troops regardless of whether or not you support the policy decisions that sent them to war. Long before that time, a relatively small group of Americans made great sacrifices on our behalf. Every generation has been asked to make their own sacrifices to protect the values that America stands for, but only the veterans of the Vietnam War were asked to do so, much without the support of a grateful nation. Thankfully, today is different. We do not let the politics of the war cloud the memories that honor the valor of those who have served. And we can gather here today to properly thank our Vietnam veterans, you, for all you have done. The video we are about to see was originally produced in 2014 for the Virginia International Tattoo, held annually in Norfolk, and is narrated by the nationally renowned actor Sam Elliott. It serves as a special tribute to our Vietnam veterans and their families, capturing the heroism of those who served and reflecting on their legacy. When this video was produced, there were 58,238 names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Since that time, even more names have been added to the wall, a harrowing reminder that the true cost of the Vietnam War continues to impact our lives today. The willingness of America's veterans to sacrifice for our country has earned them our lasting gratitude, and we are here today to say thank you. God bless you. God bless our veterans, and God bless these United States of America.
Nine million Americans served during the period of the Vietnam War. They represented 10% of their generation. 6 million of them were volunteers. They were the oldest and best educated force America ever sent into harm's way. 97% would be honorably discharged. And today, the vast majority of them testify with their actions and their words that they are proud of their service and would serve again if called. November 14th, 1965, 10:48 a.m., elements of the 7th Cavalry touched down at Landing Zone X-Ray. Within 30 minutes, the Battle of the Ia Drang began, the first major battle fought by the American Army in Vietnam. Over 3 harrowing days, vastly outnumbered American forces would hold out and ultimately repel enemy forces. American forces would never lose a major engagement during the ensuing 8 years of combat operations. Known as the Wall, the Vietnam Memorial stands in honor of those who served in the Vietnam War. The names of the men and women who gave their lives are inscribed in the order they were taken from us. 58,286 names. The youngest was Marine Private First Class Dan Bullock at 15 years of age, and the oldest was Navy Petty Officer First Class Kenneth Taylor at 62. There are 3 sets of fathers and sons, 1 set of stepbrothers, 39 pairs of brothers, 8 women, 16 clergy, and 155 Medal of Honor recipients. And let us not forget, there are still more than 1,600 missing and unaccounted for personnel. To our Vietnam veterans who answered the nation's call to serve, we thank you. Your greatness is etched in history from the battlefields of Southeast Asia to the neighborhoods of hometown America, where you continue to bring blessings and inspiration to your families and your country today. To the families of our Vietnam veterans, we thank you for the greatness of your support, sacrifice, vigilance, and compassion. And to our allies who stood by us 50 years ago, we thank you. The greatness that was earned by this generation never left you, and it never will.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Johnny Isakson, United States Senator from Georgia.
On July the 8th, 1953, 56 years ago, 2 Americans lose their life in Vietnam. Army Sergeant Chester Overend and United States Army Major Bice. A few years later, 6 years later, and Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States, signed into law the Vietnam Service Medal commemorating the sacrifice of those who served in Vietnam. And for me personally, in 1967, my best friend, Jackson Elliott Cox, lost his life in the battle in Vietnam. This is a personal day for me, as it is for every member that's here today, to honor those who sacrificed, died, or were injured during a terrible crisis and a terrible war that America participated in, and many of them who came home without the recognition that they deserved. This ceremony is all about ensuring that 50 years later, they get that recognition. The commemoration program has 3 parts. First is the recruiting of volunteers, organizations, and individuals who commit to sponsor 2 events a year for the next 3 years to commemorate the service of Americans in Vietnam. And I'm very proud, as a member of the United States Senate, that one of the first partners recruited is the Congress of the United States. And today's commemoration is the first event we will sponsor in our commitment to honor those in Vietnam. The second commitment of each one of those to host those two events begins today, and I'm proud of that. The third phase is the important phase as well, and that is to never, ever, ever forget, to show the love and the respect and the appreciation that all of us have for the veterans, the survivors, and the families of the veterans of the Vietnam War. For their sacrifice for our country was great. We live here today in peace and serve America because of what they did in the 1960s, and we honor part of the Vietnam Commemoration 50th Anniversary Program, and I'm honored to be a part of it today. God bless America.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Ashton Carter, Secretary of Defense.
Good afternoon, Speaker Boehner, Leader Pelosi, Leader Reid. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Leader McConnell also here, sir. Your commitment to the men and women of the Department of Defense, for which we are ever grateful, and your work to honor veterans of the Vietnam era and other wars. Members of Congress, distinguished colleagues from the Department of Defense, past and present. Members of the Vietnam Commemoration Advisory Committee, thank you for being here today. Thank you to the organizers and commemorative partners of this event and thousands like it across the country and the entire Vietnam commemoration effort. And most importantly, thank you to the Vietnam era veterans and their families who join us. You honor us with your presence. In a year of anniversaries, for this year also marks the 150th anniversary of the end of our Civil War, the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, the 65th anniversary of the start of the Korean War. Today, we gather to remember the Vietnam War and to honor those who served in it. We were at the anniversary of President Johnson's executive order establishing the Vietnam Service Ribbon. And we honor our 7.2 million living Vietnam-era veterans, their fallen comrades in arms, including those still unaccounted for, and the families of all who served. That era's proud soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen are part of a deep line of warriors, patriots, who served and fought in Lexington and Concord, at Gettysburg and Midway, at Ia Drang and Khe Sanh, and more recently in Fallujah and Helmand. Some of those Vietnam veterans are here today. Some bear the wounds of war or the wear of age. Some carry with them memories of fallen comrades, American fathers, uncles, brothers, and sisters who didn't make it home. And others proudly wear Vietnam veteran lapel pins and gold star buttons to remember the service and sacrifice of years past. On behalf of President Obama and the entire Department of Defense, I thank all of you for your service. I thank you for those sacrifices, and I thank you for the lessons you've taught all of us and continue to teach us. One of the reasons the United States has excelled is that as a nation we learn and innovate. And one reason why we have the finest fighting force the world has ever known is that our military is a learning organization. We learn from successes, we learn from setbacks. We take time to delve into our experiences and always strive to do better. The Vietnam War taught us many lessons, many hard-won, some difficult to swallow, but all of them have made us a better country and a better military. And there are two that I believe are particularly important to remember this day. First, we leave no one behind. We're not the only military with that ethos, nor are we the only nation with a POW-MIA accounting effort. But there are few that have such a steadfast and sustained commitment. which is about more than raising the iconic POW-MIA symbol up on the flagpoles around the nations. It's about the promise we make and we work hard to keep. Thanks in part to the staunch advocacy of Vietnam veterans and POW-MIA families, the Department of Defense has over 650 people devoted to accounting for the missing and searching for, recovering, and identifying their remains, including the 1,627 still missing from the Vietnam War. I saw some of that continuing effort on my trip to Hanoi last month, where I visited one of our POW-MIA accounting offices. The second lesson is that we must support our warriors, regardless of our feelings about the war. Unfortunately, that was a lesson some learned the hard way in the Vietnam era. But I am pleased by, and again, we have many Vietnam era veterans to thank for it, for today's veterans and service members, including the 11 GI Bill, and how our troops today are welcomed home. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, our Vietnam era veterans, for that lesson and to again welcome all of you home. Vietnam era veterans and their families helped America learn those lessons and ensure we will never forget them. Some do so quietly, mentoring today's men and women in uniform, or traveling to airports to welcome home those returning from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some do so more publicly, continuing their service in government offices in this Capitol, elsewhere in Washington and across the country, including my colleagues, Secretary John Kerry and Senator John McCain. And some are with us today. And I want to take a moment to say a few words about the next speaker. Chuck Hagel was a soldier, he's been a senator, and a distinguished Secretary of Defense. And he remains one of our most thoughtful statesmen. And I'm proud to have been able to call him a friend for many years. In Vietnam, then Sergeant Hagel led an infantry squad during the fighting that followed the Tet Offensive. Stories of his bravery and sacrifice there are well known. And throughout the rest of his life in public service, Chuck dedicated himself to those who served, normalizing and improving relations with Vietnam, to bringing home those still missing, and to ensuring we remember the Vietnam War's lessons. Thank you, Chuck. And thank you again to all the Vietnam era veterans here and around the country. May God bless you and your families for years to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Chuck Hagel, former Secretary of Defense.
To my friend Ash Carter, thank you. I appreciate your kind and thoughtful words. They could be applied to every Vietnam veteran in this audience and across this country. But Ash, thank you for your continued leadership and support for our veterans. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Speaker, distinguished leaders, distinguished guests, thank you for allowing me to participate. As a former United States Senator, I don't follow scripts, so you cannot follow anything I'm going to say on the monitors. It's one of the few prerogatives we have. That has not always held me in good stead, not following scripts in my career. As most of you understand, those independent streaks that veterans have and all veterans possess and America is better for it. I take some liberty in saying that on behalf of all Vietnam veterans and their families, thank you. And thank the leadership of the Congress for recognizing the sacrifices and the service of our Vietnam veterans and their families. Today's ceremony comes one day after the President of the United States met with the leader of the Communist Party of Vietnam. As we look to the future, not the past, to build a more hopeful world for all people. But we also learn. We learn from the past. And we're determined not to make the same mistakes in the future. In 2000, President Clinton signed into law a bill that Congressman Ron Kine, Amo Houghton, my dear friend, former Senate colleague, Vietnam veteran, Senator Max Cleland, and I sponsored to establish the Veterans History Project, which has been very ably administered by the Library of Congress. Many of you here today have given interviews and presented your oral history of your service in the military, particularly our Vietnam veterans. You'll hear excerpts today from some of those oral histories recorded as a result of this project. I'll conclude my remarks this afternoon with reading two brief passages from an interview I gave a few years ago for the book, Voices of War. My brother Tom and I were together, side by side, in Vietnam in 1968. We were one of those 39 pairs of brothers that served in Vietnam. 1968 was the worst year in Vietnam. Hard to imagine today, but we sent over 15,000 young Americans home, dead, in 1 year. The astounding sacrifices in leadership and commitment that I witnessed, the uncommon valor that I witnessed during that year in Vietnam, I have never seen since. It is projected not in only the film that Sam Elliott narrated, but also in the souls, the minds, the history, the hearts of everyone here, and I think now throughout America. After 1 year back from Vietnam, I was finishing college along with my brother, and I was working full-time as a reporter for a local radio station in Omaha. And I attended my first Veterans Day ceremony after coming back from Vietnam. And this is what I said in the interview, in the oral history. Anyone who has ever served their country in uniform and has experienced what no one else has experienced can never decouple and be decoupled from that experience. Your recognition of all the other people who also served and have been through what you have been through, just to be near them is something special. To be near somebody and know that he or she knows that you know. I think that's why the Vietnam Veteran Memorial is so powerful. You don't have to say a word. A word need not be uttered. So that first Veterans Day after I had returned from Vietnam, I wanted to be near those other veterans. I didn't expect any recognition. I just wanted to be part of a group of people who had done something very special for their country. It didn't mean that any of us were any better Americans, any more patriotic, or certainly any smarter. But we had done something that most people will never do. There's not a day goes by that you don't pull back on some little thing about your life. Because as we know, life's not about the big things. There are very few big things that happen to each of us during our lives. It's the day-to-day small things that matter. And you recall your experiences in Vietnam and in service. You recall those experiences you had with others in the Army, in Vietnam, a tolerance and understanding, a reaching beyond to understand more than the obvious. I'll conclude with this short paragraph. As Tom and I were waiting early one morning after our armored personnel carrier had been ambushed and a lot of our colleagues had been wounded, we were waiting for choppers, medevacs, to come pick us up early in the morning. It had been a bad night. And as I remember sitting on that track, both my brother and I wounded, and my brother being unconscious, waiting for that dust off, I said to myself that if I ever get out of this, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to ensure that war is the last resort that we as a great nation, as a free people, as people, ever calls upon to settle disputes. The horror of it, the suffering of it. People just don't understand unless they've been through it. And it's always fought by the little guys at the bottom. There's no glory in war, only suffering. We are a better, stronger nation today because of the tremendous sacrifices that our Vietnam veterans and their families made for this country. And I'm very proud to be part of that generation and proud to be here today representing our Vietnam veterans. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Corinne Brown, representative from Florida.
God has blessed America because of your service. You know, when you're born, you get a birth certificate. And when you die, you're going to get a death certificate. And that little dash in between is what you've done to make this a better place. Let's give the Vietnam veterans a big hand. Thank you so much for your service. And I have to acknowledge that my personal senator from Florida, Bill Nelson, is a Vietnam veteran. Let's give him a hand. He's here. Now to my assignment, honoring the sacrifice. A new widow of the war responded to a condolences from the mother of her husband's best friend. She shared about the respect that should be given to all soldiers and the faith, hope, and healing from sacrifice. Dear Mrs. Smith, thank you for your beautiful letter. Words fail me now. They really do. So I don't know what to say except thank you for remembering me. I'm glad that you and Mrs. Smith and Michael knew. I felt words would reach Michael, and I'm glad that they did. I love James so, and I will always love him. He was my world. And even though we have only 1 year of marriage, we had other years of just loving and sharing. I feel privileged to have been the wife of such a wonderful, warm man, such as he was. I'm very proud of all that he stood for and all that he was, and all of the courage it took for him to make the supreme sacrifices he did. Life without him is almost inconceivable. But he is in a better place now where nothing can hurt him. I know that. Everything he did was based on his love and faith in God, and how I must build my life for myself and our child based on that same strength. My relationship with James is no longer physical. It's almost divine, I think. My words sound hollow to me as I read over them, because feeling as mine are impossible to express. But I want you to know, I appreciate your thoughts and your concerns. I want you to know that I feel as I do about his death. I have to accept it was God's will, and it's James' way of wanting to die. That the way he would want me to feel and love him as I do, it would be wrong to be bitter. He was buried in all of the dignity and honor a soldier such as he deserved. A full military funeral. I know Micah would want me to know that. Now I'm expecting a blessing in October. I have a baby. Then I will have part of James to love and care, and I will have a purpose once again. I let you know when my little treasure arrives. Love, Susan. God has blessed America.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Scott Ridgell, Representative from Virginia.
Honoring the warrior spirit. Renowned sociologist Morris Janowicz said of the warrior spirit, "It is not easily defined. It is based on a psychological motive which drives a man to seek success in combat, regardless of his personal safety." Now, hear how one retired Army Major General described a memory that has had a lasting influence. "Soldiers are amazing people. It doesn't matter whether they've come from an all-volunteer force or a draft force or whatever else. I've always expected a lot from the people I work with and hope they expect a lot from me. The one thing that has stuck with me over the years was when I was at West Point and I was the company commander of Company 48-2. They only had 2 regiments at the time. One of the plebes was a guy named Bill. He became a lieutenant. He was a plebe in my company at West Point, and darned if he didn't show up as one of my platoon leaders in Vietnam. In this one instance, he went on to visit the other platoons and then on to his own platoon. And we were getting ready to go out. It was supposed to be easy, a milk run, but it wasn't. We ended up right in the middle of a pretty good fight. We got into a bunker and we're fighting in the bunker complex, and it's a dirty business with hand grenades. Young Bill went in and pulled the pin on his grenade. Someone yelled, "Throw it," and he did. Yet it blew up just a foot from his face, and his arm was gone, his face was gone, and his leg was hit. The medic said it didn't look like he was going to make it. And that usually means you're not going to make it. I retired 16 years ago. I was told that a West Point graduate had moved in down the street, and it was Bill. He made it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, United States Senator from Connecticut.
I'm a United States Senator, but I'm still new, so I do follow scripts. And I have the honor to say thank you to all the Vietnam veterans who are here today and all across the country, and to read a memorandum honoring the performance of duty written by Admiral Thomas Moore, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff between 1970 and 1974, to all active military in December of 1973. Subject: performance of duty. Upon termination of the longest and in many ways most difficult period of combat in our nation's history, I give you my personal salute for a job well done. The tremendous sacrifices, and in particular the supreme effort by our comrades who were lost during the war, have not been in vain. We're called upon by our nation's leaders, as we have been in the past, to carry out orders in furtherance of national policy and objective. Few can argue against the common will and determination shown by our armed forces while attaining these objectives. Performed superbly. Your spirit and elan have remained steadfast throughout. The human qualities and greatness handed down from past military generations have remained undiminished. Now the long conflict has come to a close, but our tasks remain. In coming months, we must make every effort to account for those still missing in action while we prepare ourselves for the future. As we move, I have every confidence that when our accomplishments and your accomplishments are chronicled in the pages of history, it will be written that you performed second to none in the longest, most difficult, and in many cases, the most frustrating and complex war in the history of our nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Band, combo. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Democratic Leader of the House of Representatives.
Good afternoon. That's quite an act to follow, isn't it? Music. While they were singing Respect, Secretary Hagel said that in 1968, when he was in Vietnam, that was the #1 song of the time. So that combined with his beautiful, moving story, all of us, thank you. Secretary Hagel, thank you all for being here. Mr. Speaker, Leader McConnell, Leader Reid. Speaking for the commemorative partners, Senator Johnny Isakson, what a beautiful presentation to set us off this. Commemorating the day 50 years ago when President Lyndon Johnson signed the order creating the Vietnam Service Medal. 50 years ago, our privilege to come together to once more recognize and honor the veterans and families of the Vietnam War, the men and women whose strength and humility and humanity and valor echo so powerfully through each of the letters that were just read. Highlighting those values is at the heart of this 50th year commemoration. As we recognize the courage and sacrifice of these men and women, let us also recognize that we have not done full justice in meeting the era vets and their families. Let us also recognize that Vietnam vets help grassroots organizations. I especially want to recognize one in my district in San Francisco, Swords to Plowshares, founded in 1970. The decades have healed much of the enmity between the United States of the normalization of relations between our two countries. As was mentioned by Secretary Carter, many Vietnam-era veterans and other veterans of serve in the Congress. We were all very proud when our colleague, Congressman Peterson, became Ambassador Peterson, early ambassador to as a tenant of the Hanoi. It's quite remarkable to see him go back as the ambassador. And while we're mentioning heroes, let me recognize Sam Johnson, our colleague, who is a bona fide American hero. But as we recognize that President Lincoln once warned us of the silent artillery of time, wearing away our memories of the sacrifices of past conflicts. The passing years must not, cannot dim the honor and bravery of American men and women who answered the call to serve our country in a war a world away. Time will never diminish the sacrifice of the millions of families whose loved ones were fighting in a difficult and divisive war overseas. We will never forget the memory of those who lost their lives and the families of the 58,153 Americans who were killed in the Vietnam War, the tens and tens of thousands who were wounded, the POWs, and more than 1,600 missing in action. As has been mentioned, anytime any of us goes to Vietnam or interacts with Vietnam leadership, this is a subject that we discuss. A moment ago, the band played what Secretary Hagel said was the #1 song in 1968. We all remember that. Well, some of you weren't born yet, but the rest of us remember that. It is Respect. ECT. It is respect that brought us all here today, respect that has drawn thousands of people and communities across the nation together for their own 50th anniversary Vietnam across America. Today, 50 years after the creation of the Vietnam Service Medal, gathered in the halls of the United States Capitol at the heart of our democracy, we stand united to express the immense respect and recognition our Vietnam veterans have rightly deserved. Indeed, as well as in words, we must repay American veterans in Vietnam. God has truly blessed America with all of the men and women who have served our country
Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Reid, Democratic Leader of the United States Senate.
2,709,918 is the number of Americans who served in Vietnam. Today we honor each one of the nearly 7 million servicemen and women who fought by air, land, and sea in Vietnam, and the millions of others who served during the Vietnam era. We especially today honor the ultimate sacrifice made by 58,582 of our family, friends, and countrymen. I've had the good fortune to serve in the Senate with veterans of the Vietnam War. They're my friends, because I have come to understand the price of their service, what they did, what they were asked to do. As mere boys, they become my heroes. As a hero. After college, he enlisted in the Navy, became a SEAL. I asked Bob one of the first times we spent alone, this engagement you had. It was a very dark night. He led a team on an island off the coast of Vietnam. They climbed up a big cliff. Darkest night in the history of the world. And they knew exactly where the enemy group was located, but they got the cliff and started walking back to where they came from. And in the dark of the night, they ran into the enemy. Immediately, someone dropped a grenade and, as we know, severely injured Bob Kerrey. I said, "What did you do then?" And these are not the words that he used, but the enemy was dispersed. He had a way with words. I so admire Bob Kerrey. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Chuck Hagel, as we know, Secretary of Defense, Senator from Nebraska, as was Bob Kerrey. He's here with us today. He is a hero of mine. Chuck was just 21 years old when he arrived in Vietnam, eventually being assigned to the same infantry unit. Tom saved Chuck's life. He saved his brother's life, grabbing and defusing a live grenade. But Chuck also saved his brother Tom's life, pulling his brother's unconscious body from their armored vehicle after it was hit with a mine. Senator Hagel was awarded the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, a couple Purple Hearts, Army Commendation Medal, and the Combat Infantry Badge. Senator Max Cleland, I have so much admiration for him. Whenever I have a bad day, I think of Max Cleland and what he has done to so honor his country. And to, if there were ever a hero in the world, he's it. He was a captain in the Army, 6'4" in height. He lost in Vietnam. He's awarded the Vietnam Service Medal, Silver Star, Bronze Star. Senator John McCain is a hero. We came to the House together. We came to the Senate together. He was a combat pilot, Navy pilot, when his plane was shot down over Hanoi, where he was taken prisoner very quickly, confined to a North Vietnamese prison for 5.5 years, 3 years of it in solitary confinement. And of course, during this time, he was brutally tortured. He was awarded the Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Navy Commendation Medal. Senator Larry Pressler was a Rhodes Scholar, Harvard Law graduate, Harvard undergraduate law degree. When he enlisted in the Army, he served 2 combat tours in Vietnam. Secretary of State John Kerry certainly is a hero, as is every Vietnam senator I've talked about. John was a lieutenant in the Navy. He's charged with command of a swift boat navigating the savage rivers of Vietnam. He was awarded 3 Purple Hearts, Silver Star, Bronze Star for his gallantry. Senator Tom Carper served 3 tours of duty as a flight officer in the Navy, flew hundreds of hours in a P-13 Orion surveillance aircraft. Former Senator and Secretary of the Navy Jim Webb was a Marine lieutenant during the war. He was awarded the Navy's Cross, Silver, 2 Purple Hearts. He's authored several books about Vietnam. Senator Tom Harkin was a Navy pilot in the Vietnam era. Former Senator Chuck Robb's son-in-law, President Lyndon Johnson, served 2 tours of combat duty in Vietnam. He was awarded of active duty in Vietnam with the United States Navy. As a senator, Bob introduced a resolution to create a Senate Select Committee of Missing and POWs. I had the good fortune of serving on that committee for a year. It was to investigate service members who were missing in action or were thought to be held as prisoners. All heroes, every one of them without any distinction or exception. Each of these fellow senators served our country and did so with distinction, not unlike the millions of other Vietnam veterans who participated in that war in one way or the other. Sadly, though, we've heard today that these veterans of Vietnam era haven't always received the praise and gratitude they earned. Hopefully today brings a little of that back and tells them how much we really appreciate everything they did for us. Much has changed over the past 50 years. Even our relationship with Vietnam has changed. Our 2 countries reestablished diplomatic relations 20 years ago. What started that diplomatic relationship? 2 Vietnam veterans. No 2 are more important than John Kerry and John McCain, who some thought swallowed a lot of pride, but those 2 men have always been courageous, and they went over there and started talking and made it easier for all the rest of us to do so. So I so admire these 2 men for all the reasons that I've mentioned. But think about that. As we've heard today, the leader of the Communist Party, the leading person that runs this Vietnam, was here talking to the President of the United States yesterday, reestablishing as in a very more deeper form our relationships. But what hasn't changed in this 50 years is our debt to the American Vietnam veterans. So today we thank you, all millions and millions of you. Your sacrifices will always be remembered.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader of the United States Senate.
Each morning, dawn breaks over the Kentucky Capitol in Frankfort. Bars of light stream across the dome. A hall of democracy brightens with renewed purpose. And overlooking it, light pours into 200 tons of granite and more than 1,100 engraved names, each a Kentuckian who made the ultimate sacrifice in Vietnam. An enormous sundial, casting a solitary shadow, marks the anniversary of every Kentuckian who fell that same day so many years ago. Kentucky's Vietnam Veterans Memorial, perched above a potent symbol of our democracy, powerfully honors the fallen and the more than 125,000 Kentuckians who served. It reminds us that dawn beckons for a country because of the sacrifices of the men and women of our armed forces. It reminds us that Americans live free through their courage and their determination. The debt of gratitude our country owes to veterans is enormous. Americans routinely demonstrate gratitude to our military men and women today. We showed it after World War II, but circumstances were different in the Vietnam era. Spit, not roses. Scorn, not gratitude, awaited too many young service members upon their return. What a cruel homecoming for them. What a heartbreaking tragedy for their families. It should redouble our determination to ensure America's debts are repaid to them. Today's ceremony is but one example of our country's resolve. But it's hardly the only one. Over the years, Americans have worked hard to show those who fought in Vietnam that gratitude deferred will not be gratitude denied. So often, they've done so with two simple but powerful words: thank you. Saying thank you to every American who served in Vietnam. Saying thank you to the millions of veterans. Saying thank you to the families who once dreaded every knock on the door and every night. And also saying to the thousands of Americans who fell in service to their country, to those who still remain unaccounted for, to every loved one left behind, saying that our country honors you, that our country thanks you, that our country will not forget you, not just today, but every day. Kentucky honors its fallen Vietnam veterans in unyielding granite, overlooking a symbol of enduring democracy. In Washington, too, the wall of the Vietnam Memorial sits just beyond the Capitol, continually reminding Americans of the sacrifice, the honor, and the thanks each of us owe to so many others. Our country will not forget it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable John Boehner, Speaker of Representatives.
A lapel pin has been created to recognize the contributions and sacrifices of all those who served on active duty from November 1st, 1955 to May 15th, 1975. I would like now to invite representatives from the Vietnam veterans, leaders of the United States Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Coast Guard to the front of the room in front of the stage for a ceremonial pinning. The lapel pin pictured in your program is available to those who served on active duty during the war. Our hope is that our Vietnam veterans know that Americans appreciate the contributions and sacrifices made to maintain the freedoms that we hold so dear. Please stay seated and hold your applause until the end of the pinning ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Chorus and Band, Pershing Zone. And now, as the chorus and band perform the Armed Forces Medley, we invite those of you in the audience who have served or who are currently serving to stand and join in as your song is presented. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as Dr. Barry Black, the chaplain of the United States Senate, gives the benediction.
Let us pray. Eternal God, Superintendent of nations, owner of the world and all that dwell therein, we thank you for what our eyes have seen, our ears have heard, and our hearts have. Lord, we're grateful for this opportunity to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, to acknowledge the sacrifices of our veterans and their to show for the contributions of diverse individual groups, agencies, organizations, and allies. As we receive inspiration from laudable lives, inspire us to also live with exemplary excellence. May we, more than self, our country love, and mercy more than life. Lord, empower us to leave the world better than we found it, as we strive to do your will on earth, even as it is done in heaven. We pray in your sovereign name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated and remain in your seats.